Hi everyone. My name is Yana and I'm a googleologist. I specialize in delivering a business's target audience with the required parameters, mainly using AI and Google Ads tools. And the main AI tool in the Google Ads dashboard is, of course, Performance Max. And in today's video, we'll talk about 5 common mistakes you make in your own Google Ads account that prevent you from scaling your performance. So let's start with the first reason. It's the structure of your campaigns. Why do I put this in first place? Why is this so important? Because usually Google recommends, and most online stores, especially in Ukraine, start with just a single advertising campaign. And that's not a bad strategy for getting started, for collecting some basic analytics, or for making your first sales. But at some point, you start thinking about scaling up. And just by increasing your advertising budget, you can't make it work, because Google very quickly eats up all the profit margin from that ad campaign. So, for example, last month this ad campaign was completely profitable, but now it's slipping into the red, and even going back to your previous budgets doesn't help. Because you have to understand that Google doesn't operate with your data the way your business does. It doesn't understand how you think, which products you need to sell, or what should be selling. It just doesn't get that. In reality, the product that shows up first after you launch an ad campaign is mostly a matter of chance. So, there's no guarantee that it will put the right product into the auction, the one that could actually generate a significant number of sales. There's no guarantee it will start showing the right product either. There's no guarantee it will allocate the budget correctly within the ad account at all. So at some point, you might be generating sales and they might be profitable, but as you scale, things can get skewed either towards products that quickly go out of stock because you've sold them all, or, for example, you launched during the season, and once the season ends for certain products, your performance breaks down and you can't get the same sales from off-season products, even though they have steady demand. And there are a lot of other little factors and nuances. How should you structure your performance? This might actually be a topic for a separate video to really understand how to do it right and in what way. But the main thing people forget is this, first of all, that you yourself know which product should be selling and which shouldn't. Second, you know which products in your store are high margin and which are not. Here's a typical situation during a consultation. A business complains that it can't increase the number of, for example, products with a sufficient margin, or, for instance, out of the whole product range, you're selling a very cheap product with a very low markup. And for the product that could actually bring you significant sales, it might be shown, but over the whole month you spent at most 2,000 hryvnias on it and earned, for example, more than half of the total turnover that was generated by all the other products in the lower price range. Review your product assortment, first and foremost not by the type of products, but by their profitability. Focus more on the products from which you expect to make a decent profit. Because generating sales from very small items that are easy to sell doesn't take much brains. Anyone can handle that. But if you want to increase your average check, only you can make that happen. Another common problem in structures is that people forget there's often an illogical priority in how products are shown by the performance system itself. That is, it can give so many impressions and so much traffic to some products that this imbalance shifts toward 1 or 2 items, while all the other products don't get any exposure. Keep an eye on this as well, because performance doesn't optimize based on your purchases or data if you haven't collected enough of it yet in your ad account. It optimizes based on behavioral statistics, on the clicks it receives. So, maybe some set of data told it that this product could sell, but because you didn't limit the budget or didn't set the right profitability in your bidding strategies, it can make this imbalance very pronounced. So keep an eye on this. Another common problem in performance is that you forget you usually have a very large block of products. On average, in fact, in online stores this block makes up from 50 to 70% of the entire product assortment. products that are practically never clicked on or even shown. Take your product analytics and segment, for example, over the last 30 days, the products that received less than 500 impressions. Look, 500 impressions is almost 16 impressions per day. Your CTR won't be 10 or 20% from these impressions. On average, the CTR there is about 1.5 to 2%. For some it might be a bit lower, for others a bit higher. But if you don't keep track of this, if you have products that are barely shown or not shown at all, or that don't get clicked, you're actually losing a lot in sales. Why? Because very often, due to certain signal glitches, performance can end up pessimizing, that is, reducing the number of impressions, even for your best-selling products. The next structural problem, and the most common one, is that your profitable cash cows, the products that consistently generate sales, often sell out quickly and go out of stock in this campaign, causing performance to completely tank. In other words, it won't be able to quickly find a replacement for them, and this search for alternative replacement products can take a very long time. If you don't do this kind of product-by-product analysis, then accordingly, your performance won't be able to recover to the turnover volumes you might want, for example. The second reason is that when you want to scale up, you don't limit performance in terms of return on investment. What does in terms of return on investment mean? It doesn't matter which strategy you start with, whether it's maximizing conversions or maximizing value. At some point, you'll start scaling your performance by increasing your advertising budget. That's the right decision. All advertising campaigns are scaled by increasing the advertising budget. Why by increasing the advertising budget? Because a bigger budget means higher frequency, the frequency of impressions within a day, a month, or a week, including the search for new queries or audiences that will lead to these sales. So, Google doesn't know what margin you're building into these products. Why? Someone sells via dropshipping, so their margin is lower. Someone else is a manufacturer, so their margin might be higher, or maybe they're the supplier themselves. Accordingly, they adjust this margin themselves, even influencing the market in some way. So, there are situations when you scale up your ad account without any limits, and at some point, this margin starts to get eaten up. And the main typical problem is that, in most cases, it happens when you use the maximize value strategy without any profitability constraints. Yes, it's hard to work with profitability. Even Google reps can't give you a clear, straightforward algorithm for how to work with it, because there are so many factors that affect it. But the maximize value strategy only brings you good profitability when you're working with a small budget. Because this small budget can be stretched quite efficiently across a certain product assortment. But as soon as you try to scale it, this strategy will eat up your money very quickly. Why? Because the strategy is called maximize value. In other words, even if it brings you just a couple more hryvnias in revenue than you spend, it's already considered an effective solution for this. That's why choosing the right bidding strategy, whether it's return on ad spend or cost per conversion, is a very important nuance in the context of the previous point about the structure of performance max campaigns. The third common mistake is having a rather sparse feed in Merchant Center, which limits the potential of your performance. What does a sparse feed in Merchant Center mean? Most manuals on setting up Performance Max are heavily focused on how to adjust the signal within Performance Max or how to set up these objects with images or other elements. If you've watched even one video on setting up Performance Max, you'll see that I recommend configuring your Performance Max campaigns from Merchant Center without any assets and even without signals. Why? Because, well, first of all, for most stores, what you primarily need is the shopping ad format, specifically smart shopping ads. And the second reason is that your feed should be the main foundation for targeting in the first place. Well, because if you're starting completely from scratch, you don't yet have any useful behavioral analytics, any statistically significant useful analytics about how people add items to their cart. Who are these people? Who is buying this? Because this avatar, based on a very small number of conversions, can be very blurry. And if you start specifying very minor details in the signals, like trying to perfect this signal, most likely even in the first A/B tests, you'll throw off the AI from what it actually needs. It has retail functionality built in. That is, it understands the behavior model of your customer before making a purchase. And as a basis for targeting, understanding what the product is about, whether to play in an expensive or cheap auction, it can figure that out based on your feed. Plus, if the AI sees that your signals aren't useful, they will simply ignore them and target based on other A/B tests it comes up with. That's why your feed serves as the foundation. Plus, you have to understand that the principles of Google's auction haven't changed in a very, very long time. In other words, the way the ad ranking principle was set up when entering the auction is still the same. It's just that now, for calculating the ranking, it's not a search ad with a keyword, but a product ad that is used. You might have 20 products on your site, which means you have 20 product ads, while someone else might have over 100,000 of these shopping ads. And a ranking is calculated for each ad. So if your feed is lacking your own target keywords, if it's missing attributes that you couldn't add for various reasons, maybe you were lazy, maybe it's technically impossible or something else, then of course your ad will lose out in terms of CTR, clickability, to other competitors. So, if Google sees that your ads aren't getting enough clicks, they will start to downgrade your impressions, either showing them less actively or placing them somewhere in the back, and you'll end up thinking that the problem is with the signal, the bidding strategy, or something like that. This is a very important nuance, because several factors will affect your ad ranking. One is the cost per click, which unfortunately we don't set in Performance Max. It sets it automatically. And another is the quality score when targeting by search query. There are three aspects to quality score: the quality of the landing page, which is pretty hard for everyone to influence, the relevance of the ad, the presence of target keywords you're showing for, and definitely the expected CTR, meaning how historically clickable your ad has been. That's why it often happens that your ad has a very low CTR for various reasons, mainly because your feed is lacking in attributes. It's not because you did something wrong with the images. No, that's not the case here. A very sparse feed usually affects this whole situation, so your ad ranking might be low and, as a result, your performance will get little exposure. At best, you'll just end up overpaying for your cost per click. The next common mistake is not tracking your actual objective position in the auction statistics. There's a report like this for every Performance Max in the shopping ads section called Auction Insights. These auction insights are actually a very powerful tool for understanding how to optimize your feed, what bids to set, how to adjust your budgeting and the structure of your shopping campaigns in general, and a whole lot more. Usually, we look at auction insights through the lens of reach. Well, if Google shows us at the top, that means we're at the top. But you forget that these metrics are based on a very limited volume of search queries that this performance received over a certain period of time. That is, based on some specific search queries. Why do you think this is some kind of an absolute market indicator? No, of course not. It just doesn't happen that you spent, say, 200 or 300 hryvnias and were at the top, while Rosetko was at the bottom. Why? Here's an objective example that you're interpreting this auction statistics a bit incorrectly. It's not that it's lying, it's just, well, it's telling the truth, but not completely. It's not showing the whole picture. Your position in the auction statistics. Where are your competitors? How far are you in the auction statistics? It's a very typical situation when a business comes in for an audit or a consultation and says, my competitor definitely has way more sales than I do right now, because either the supplier told me or they talked among themselves. That's a whole separate story, how they find that out. And if you look at their auction statistics, it seems like they're at the top, while their competitor is supposedly getting less than 20% coverage. So the question is, if they're on a platform like Prom or CoreShop, where SEO promotion isn't possible, but they're still getting pretty big turnover, that only points to one factor: you're playing in an auction where they're not, and as a result, they're getting those sales and you're not, because you're basically playing in different sandboxes, so to speak. That's why understanding exactly where you are and adjusting your auction statistics so that you can influence them is also a key point that people often forget, and it's something that directly affects your ability to scale. Not only in terms of trying to achieve the results your competitor is getting, but also in terms of capturing the market and scaling, with the context of truly understanding whether this is the lowest possible cost per conversion, whether you're already overpaying, or whether the cost per click is fair and reasonable. Are you actually playing in the market as a full-fledged player, or are you somewhere in the background on the sidelines? So this is a very big and powerful report, which, by the way, some people at Google are apparently thinking about removing. But I haven't seen a single specialist who doesn't use it. The fifth common mistake, or rather the metric that you generally don't track, is your conversion of performance into sales or another goal that you're monitoring. Because there are stores where, for example, the main conversion is phone calls, and you should take that into account as well. Why don't people track this? Look, this is a very important diagnostic metric before you start scaling your budgets, because it's the one that will tell you whether you're going to end up deep in the red or if you'll scale effectively. What? Because, well, I've already talked on YouTube about how you need to calculate your break-even point of profitability based on your margin, right? There were videos about calculating the break-even cost per click. But I haven't yet talked about calculating the break-even conversion rate, meaning your conversion. And it actually diagnostically shows you whether you'll be able to scale or if you'll just be giving your money to Google. You need to calculate this break-even conversion rate either for those products based on their margin, or maybe you have other metrics, or at the very least, for your products in general. It's a must. Generally, if we take the market average, the typical store conversion rate is about 1.5%. But that's assuming you have a very low cost per click. If your cost per click is very high and you want a very low cost per conversion, up to 120 or 150 hryvnias, then your conversion rate needs to be much higher. You need to track that. A conversion rate below 1% is usually seen in cases where you're building funnel-type performance campaigns, where you're just capturing people and then pulling them further with other campaigns, or in situations where you have a very high average check. Because people often need to visit your site several times, they can take a long time to make a choice, so in those cases, a low conversion rate can actually be considered normal. A low conversion rate below 1 can be considered normal for performance campaigns that use ASEC optimization, like these objects, banners, videos, things like that. This is also a possible scenario for them. But if you have a feed-only format and you see that when you scale the budget, the campaign just eats up all the profitability. The problem is that before this, it was generating low-quality traffic. Well, let's put it this way, it's not exactly low quality. It's just that the customer avatar that the AI has drawn for itself. After all, you've been feeding the AI some kind of AI agent all this time with analytics. It's just that this analytics describes the customer avatar in a very primitive way, which is why the AI can't really hit the bullseye. So this is one of the typical problems, and practically everyone faces it. That's why I recommend keeping an eye on this metric. The higher it is, or at least if it matches your break-even point, the safer it is in general to scale up your ad budgets, restructure things, and test different bidding strategy options. Even when working at the maximum value, it's much safer if you have a fairly high conversion rate relative to your break-even points. These are the typical problems that you either don't diagnose or don't keep track of, and which lead to you being unable to effectively scale your performance max campaigns.